Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Jeremy Leffler, and I work in the Policy Office in the Division of Institution and Award Support at the National Science Foundation. And it's my pleasure to welcome you today to the Fall 2024 NSF Virtual Grants Conference. And I'm now pleased to turn this session over to our presenters who will cover proposal preparation at NSF.
Well, welcome everyone to the proposal preparation session at the Fall 2024 Virtual Grants Conference. This session will provide information to help you navigate the proposal preparation and submission process at NSF. Throughout this, we'll provide helpful hints, lessons learned that we believe will make this process easier to understand and work through. Next slide, please. My name is Jean Feldman. I'm head of the policy office at NSF and have been involved in these sessions since we first began our grants conferences at NSF, and this is my 52nd of these sessions. Now I'd like to have my other colleagues introduce themselves. I can assure you that both of these program directors are very seasoned and very experienced. Carol.
Hello, my name is Carol Bessel. I'm the section head for the Division of Translational Impacts in the new Directorate for Technology, Innovation, and Partnerships. Very happy to be here today.
And I'm Jennifer Wade. I'm a program director in the Division of Earth Sciences, which is in Geo.
Thanks to both of you. Next slide, please. Well, we have a lot of topics to cover in this proposal preparation section. We always start with how you find that funding opportunity, how you find the one that's right for you at NSF to prepare that proposal and submit it to NSF. We also cover a document that is truly the backbone of our proposal and award process at NSF, called the Proposal and Award Policies and Procedures Guide. You'll be hearing it about this document through this session, in the merit review session, in the award and administration section. So you're really going to be hearing about this document a lot. So we hope that you become very familiar with it. We're going to go through the types of submissions at NSF, not just full proposals. We have concept outlines, letters of intent, preliminary proposals, full proposals. We'll walk you through these various types of submissions, explaining what they are and what they're and how they're used at NSF. So we will also go into the sections of an NSF proposal, and I want to make very clear here that during this particular session, we're going to be focusing on a research proposal. But the PAP guide also contains specific guidance for preparation of other types of proposals, such as planning, rapid response research, early concept grants for exploratory research, conference travel, and more. And those are specifically covered in Chapter 2 of the PAP guide. Next slide, please.
All right, I'm going to take it from here, Jean. So there are a few different ways to find which funding opportunity you want to apply to and all kinds of other information on nsf.gov. So first, you can go straight to the tab that says Find Funding and Apply here at the top and get a lot of the information that we are presenting today. Next slide. So you can search by keyword, you can filter things by directorate or the kind of proposal you're looking for, and you'll come up with a bunch of the different funding opportunities, solicitations, which programs to apply to. Next. You can also search awards by keyword, and I think this is really helpful if you're not sure like where your research might fit. So you can type a keyword here and it'll bring up a list of awards that NSF has made. And you can find out who was funded at what institutions for how much money and by what program, which is one of the key components, right? So again, this is really helpful if you're trying to figure out what program your research fits into, what's the scale and scope of things that are funded sort of in your area. Next. There's also grants.gov, of course, which has a similar keyword search option to look for your own topic and lots of resources to see which programs at NSF, but also other agencies have funded work in that area. Next. Okay, so once you know which program you want to apply to, you've identified it, you need to get a proposal together. And as Jean said, the first document, the backbone of this process that you want to be familiar with is the PAPPG, or the Proposal and Award Policies and Procedures Guide. So this is an incredibly useful document, tells you almost everything you need to know about submitting to NSF. And it's broken into two parts: proposal preparation and submission, and then award administration. And it's important to know that it's updated nearly every year or so. So make sure that you're working with the most recent version, the current version, which will say along the bottom there when it took effect. Next slide. Okay. Now that you know where you want to submit a proposal, you've memorized the proposal guide, I want to walk you through the proposal lifecycle. So what happens inside of NSF when you submit something? Okay, so first, your organization and you as the PI submit to research.gov. So your proposal comes to us. It gets checked for compliance to make sure that it adheres to the guidelines in the PAPPG, and then it comes to me, the program director. And I say program director, I just want to pause here for a second. I say program director, you'll read in the PAP guide mostly program officer. Some people say program manager. These are all the same thing. We are the same people. It's just different terms for the same job. Okay, so if we determine your proposal is compliant, it's going to go through the merit review process. And this can happen in a few different ways here at the agency. It can go to ad hoc review, where we send it out to some experts. We could convene a panel of experts to look at the proposals and consider it that way. My program does a combination of both, ad hoc and panel. And then there are some proposal types that are just internally reviewed. So proposal will go through merit review. And then the program director is going to make a recommendation to either award or decline that proposal. And then we write up a bunch of paperwork, and it goes to our division director or their designee, and they concur with our decision, hopefully. And at that moment, when the division director pushes that button, that's when the PI and the institution get access to the reviews and the panel summaries and the PO comments, which are things that we write that are sort of our take on the decision. And if this is a decline, that is the end of the road for that proposal. And so somebody will get access to those reviews and move on. If the recommendation is an award, then that recommendation goes up to the Division of Grants and Agreements, or DGA. And they're the ones that actually make the award back to the institution where the funding goes. And I just put a timeline here to give you a sense of how long this can all take. So most opportunities give you at least 90 days to prepare and submit a proposal. And then it takes, on average, across NSF, 6 months for us to review a proposal and reach a decision. Sometimes it's shorter, sometimes it's longer, especially when we don't have a budget, but it can take, on average, 6 months. And then DGA, the Division of Grants and Agreements, has 30 days to process and actually make that award. Okay. So I've said solicitation a lot because that's what my program uses and is the most common here at NSF, but there are several different kinds of funding opportunities, and they're explained in the PAPPG, but we want to cover them here because each one is a little bit different, and we want to make sure that you know which kind of opportunity you're submitting to before you prepare the proposal. So program descriptions are very broad. They lay out the scope and the focus of what the program is interested in, and then you follow the instructions in the PAPPG for how to prepare a proposal. Program announcements is pretty similar to a program description. They're not used that often, but again, you're reading just the synopsis of what they're interested in, and you follow the instructions in the PAPPG. Solicitations are a little bit more complex. So these these lay out everything that the program is interested to, but they also usually have a whole other set of instructions that add on to the PAPPG. So like, for instance, in my program, we have some extra requirements about mentorship and permitting and field safety protocols, things like that. And then dear colleague letters, the last kind, provide general information They might add on to an existing program or be a special competition for extra money. And they also can announce interest in things like rapids or raise. And Jean, did you want to add something?
Yeah, and this is, there's often opportunities in this session to explain how NSF does things versus many of our other federal research funding colleague agencies. And I could tell you NSF's categories of funding opportunities are very unique to us. Many just have one basic way, a solicitation, or they'll call it a funding opportunity, but they all fall into one box. So NSF, and these terms are important at NSF because we use these various opportunities to provide greater flexibility to our programs and getting these unique opportunities out to you in the most efficient and effective way. And based on what we're trying to do with that funding opportunity, it will fall into one of these four categories. But I think it's important for you to know that this number of funding opportunities is pretty unique to the National Science Foundation. Next slide, please.
All right. So as I said, the solicitations are the most common and also kind of complex. So I just want to highlight some things to look for when you're reading one. And we're going to go into some of this a little bit later. But so there's an introduction, right? Tells you sort of what is this program about? What are they interested in supporting? And then the program description, it'll go into more detail about that. It'll give you information about, award information. So what's the size? How much money does the program have? How many awards do they expect to make? There's information about eligibility. Are you as a individual eligible? Is your institution eligible? This is where it'll tell you in the solicitation. There might be some extra preparation and submission instructions. It'll describe the review procedures. There might be special merit review criteria in addition to the main ones that you'll hear about in the merit review session. And it might tell you there might be some award conditions, things that people who get these awards need to follow. And so it'll lay this all out. And then it'll include contacts. So if you have questions about that solicitation, it'll give you email addresses of who you can ask all of these questions of. So solicitations are really, other than the PAPPG, they are the next most important thing to make sure you read carefully and understand so that when you submit, you're meeting each of the things that the solicitation requires. And now I think I'll pass it to Carol.
So there are several different types of proposal submissions, and we're just going to step through these really quickly. The concept outline is really an opportunity to make sure that your proposal is appropriate for the proposal type and the funding opportunity. So, if you're considering a rapid, eager, or raise, or if you have kind of a new funding opportunity and you want to get some preliminary feedback if you're appropriate, then you'll submit this. The program director will send you an email saying if it's appropriate, and then you can go ahead and submit your proposal. The letters of intent are slightly different. Here, you're just telling NSF that you are planning to submit. It's often used when the program directors are doing a new program, when they want to start arranging their panels and finding reviewers and avoiding conflicts of interest. So it's information in the proposal that you just are giving them about what you think the scope of your work will be. Preliminary proposals are also used quite often, again, for exploratory initiatives. You can have two different types. One is the invite and not invite, and that is a hard decision. So you're either allowed to submit your proposal or not, and you can have encourage or discourage, and that's advisory. So if you get an encourage or discourage, you can still submit your proposal even if you're discouraged, but you should know that the program staff didn't think that the proposal was quite following the guidance that was given in the solicitation or other announcement. To submit a preliminary proposal, just remember, there is a new preliminary proposal module in research.gov, so please remember to use that. Next slide, please. And now we're going to talk about types of due dates. So there are several again. So no deadlines means what it says. You can submit that proposal anytime. But as Jen said, often a proposal can take 6 months to review, and NSF normally spends its money for the fiscal year in early August. So working back from that, you often want to submit before February if you want funding in that fiscal year. It's not a hard deadline. You can certainly submit in March, April, and May, but the program will actually have to work very quickly to get funding out in that fiscal year. Target dates, again, this is when the program is going to start putting together their panels and their review committees and things like that. You can submit after the target date, but it may or may not be able to be included in the panel. So we still want your proposal, but it may be delayed a bit if you miss that target date. Submission windows are just that. It's a period of time in which you can submit your proposal. Important to note that at the end of the submission window, we treat that as a deadline. So do get your proposal in before the last day of that submission window. And then deadlines are quite firm at the foundation. We will not accept proposals, or we can return your proposal without review if you miss the deadline. Of course, the deadline can be waived if there's extenuating circumstances. Sometimes there's a problem with the submission system at NSF, and in which case you should get a ticket from the IT help desk to confirm that there was a legitimate problem with the submission, or you can get an authorization to deviate. So sometimes if you have a personal circumstance or there is a problem like a hurricane or a flood in your area, you may be able to extend the deadline. It's best if you can ask about that before the deadline instead of waiting too long. And it is 5 o'clock submitting organization's time. So if you're a PI who's teleworking in California and your organization is in Boston, the deadline is Boston time. Next slide, please. So the required selections of a research proposal are very clearly laid out in the PAPPG, and there are many different sections that we're going to go over in the next few slides. But it's very important for everyone to realize that last line is the key, that the proposals that don't contain the required sections may not be accepted or can be returned without review. So next slide, please. And so we're going to look at these sections of the proposal kind of one by one, give you some ideas of what to highlight, what are really the important parts. So the cover sheet of the proposal, obviously, this is important information for NSF to consider to make sure your proposal gets to the right place and the right time. The boxes on the cover sheet are electronically pre-filled, many of them, so you can again make sure that it gets appropriately sorted and to the appropriate program directors. And Jean, I don't know if you'd like to say some more here.
Yeah, there's a couple other things that I think are worth pointing out here. The bottom, it's hard to see, but the bottom on here of this slide on the cover sheet has a listing of names of PI and co-PI. And NSF longstanding policy is that a proposal can have 1 PI and up to 4 co-PIs. It's very, very important. This information is actually, should you be the merit review process, provide you with a great decision of, yes, we are going to fund you. Our award system will pull exactly from this page. So if you try in your materials to say, well, they're really a PI, but we really need 6 co-PIs, it's simply not going to happen because the information will be pulled directly from the listing that is provided on this cover sheet. And that is something very important to bear in mind. Next slide, please. So there in the middle of this document, of this cover sheet, there's a series of cover sheet checkboxes. These are incredibly important information to NSF. They are used to help us process the proposal. They are used to help us comply with a lot of federal-wide requirements, things like live vertebrate animals, historic places, human subjects. They provide the program officer with an idea that, oh, they're going to have to provide additional information to us. The funding of an international branch campus of a U.S. institution of higher education, or the funding of a foreign organization or foreign individual. More information is going to have to be provided, a justification in the actual project description. It's information to highlight documents which will need to be provided later on in the process. So this information is very, very important to us for the reasons I've already described. Let me give you, though, an example of what can happen. Folks don't take this seriously. They don't check the live vertebrate animals box. They don't check the human subjects box. And then when the time comes, and it goes through review, the reviewers or a program officer figure out, wow, there really are live vertebrate animals involved here. They didn't check the box. Human subjects, the same thing. They're going to have to come to you and get more information. And when many of your awards are funded in the fourth quarter, the turnaround is very quick. So it's very, very important that while these may seem administrative and not very important, they are actually very important to the processing of a proposal at NSF. Next slide, please.
So some proposals have documents that are for NSF use only. Those are the single copy documents. These documents are not provided to the reviewers, but only visible to the people inside of NSF. Those include the authorization to deviate, and we talked about that earlier. Perhaps you got an extended deadline, something like that. The list of suggested reviewers, both people to include and people to not include as a reviewer for your proposal. This is optional, but I'll say as a program director, this was a big plus if a proposer gave me a few reviewer suggestions. Obviously, probably not your people that you're collaborating with. That's not helpful. But I loved to receive up to 6 reviewer suggestions. I liked them to be in the United States if possible. And they were very, very helpful in making sure that I understood, where you thought your proposal would be best reviewed, and who were your peers in the area. There is proprietary or privileged information. This is fairly rare, but if you were submitting, honestly, to the small business innovation research or small business technology transfer programs, you might have proprietary or privileged information. Those are fairly specialized proposals. And the other one I'd like to really touch on is the collaborators and other affiliations. So for each individual identified as a senior or key person on the project, you need to fill in a COA form. There is a template if you want to use that, super helpful. And I would really advise you to read the PAPPG and the accompanying FAQs to make sure you're including all of the relevant information. Next slide, please. The project summary sounds fairly obvious, but this is the first thing that people are really going to focus in on. Both the program directors who are looking to find reviewers and to sort your proposal into a panel, as well as the reviewers themselves. So honestly, I when I wrote proposals, this was the first thing I wrote, but it was the last thing I checked, because often in writing the proposal, your aims and goals may change a bit. And there's nothing worse for a program director or a reviewer to get a panel, a project summary that isn't really reflective of the rest of the proposal. So one of the things that you really need to do is check this again, because there's no second chance at making a good first impression. Often these project summaries are used for preliminary drafts of the award abstract, so it's also helpful for that. And it should be read very, very carefully. Jen and Jean, would you like to say any more here?
I think you've covered it really nicely, Carol. I would emphasize, after doing so many of these things, we are often asked, well, should I start writing the project summary and then develop my project description? Or should I do it in reverse? No, there is no one right way to do things. But as Carol emphasized, this document is the first document your folks are going to see. This is your true opportunity to generate real interest on the part of the reviewer. Wow, I like what I'm seeing. I want to see more. And so it is an incredible opportunity, and one that should not be missed and dismissed as, oh, I'll just focus on one part of the proposal. All parts of the proposal are truly important. And this can really, really be a good first step, writing this very strong project summary, followed up by your great project description that we'll be talking about soon. Jen?
You both said it so well. I just second all of it.
Next slide.
Excellent. Excellent. Next slide, please. And here we could really spend some time on the project description. So this is the meat of any proposal. It's typically 15 pages and includes the results from prior NSF support. And I can't emphasize this enough. It's what you want to do, why you want to do it, how you plan to do it, how you'll know if you succeed, and what benefits would accrue if the project is successful. So those are great. Again, as a former program director and a proposal writer, I like to see several things in a project description. The first one is kind of what I would call the bread and butter experiments. So these are the experiments that you're going to do that are probably going to be successful as you've stated it. But they need to be done, and they need to be done in a specific order to give you the ability to kind of reach for the stars. I always like to read proposals where there are some higher risk elements. You're not just telling me, oh, I can do this, and it kind of looks incremental. I really want to see, wow, if this really was successful, how exciting this would be. And so I want to see that high risk, high reward kind of activity in the project description. Also, we're scientists. Sometimes things work, sometimes things don't. So please include a contingency plan. If some of your high risk activities don't work, what will you do? How will you solve the problem and work around it? And then many divisions and directorates have a tradition of really looking for milestones in the project description. So if possible, you want to perhaps become a reviewer at some point. Look at the proposals that are submitted to that program and that division or that directorate. If they really use milestones, then definitely you want to include those in your project description as well. So what is the timeline of things and how you will do it? And I will turn this over to Jen and see if I missed anything.
No, I think you covered a great bit, and I will say sort of similar to milestones, but just generally in this in the theme of sort of bullet 4, right? How will you know if you're successful? That's one of the things too. Even if you're not using milestones, how are you going to assess success of a project? This is like a common mistake I think that I see in a lot of proposals. So having that assessment there is really important. And keep in mind, you can use a lot of ways to express what you want to do, why and how, and who is doing what. You can, if you're not great at writing a narrative, you have a very complex project over many years that involves a lot of people, build a table, draw a Gantt chart, be creative in how you and how you demonstrate this. It doesn't just have to be like a ton of text. Some people use figures and tables really effectively, make sure they're legible. We'll talk a little bit about this later, but really you can answer all of these questions in many different ways, whatever's best suited to your project.
Let me just also add one other more bureaucratic thing, and it's the red text at the bottom. And we get a lot of questions at policy@nsf.gov all the time on when can I include a URL? What sections can I include them? And it's vital that you understand that in the project description, there can be no URLs. Obviously, if you put a URL in, it violates the 15-page limitation because you could be taking the reviewer and the NSF program officer to a 500-page document. Also, it protects the confidentiality of our process because you can set up a page and find out who visited your page. And that certainly is very much not permissible at NSF. So I did want to emphasize this. This is one of the key parts in the proposal. People use URLs everywhere and all the time, and I just wanted to make that point. Next slide, please.
So a little bit more on the project description. You need to discuss intellectual merit and broader impacts in your proposal. And I think intellectual merit's a lot easier for PIs to get their head around. That's the science piece. And scientists are usually pretty good about talking about their science, and they like it. Broader impacts can be a lot of different things, and they can be harder, I think, for some PIs to sort of express or understand, and for reviewers to understand. And so I want to say a few things about them. They can be a lot of different things. It's not just education and training, unless the solicitation says that they need to be. They can be a lot of things. They can be impacting policy. They can be building infrastructure, developing standards that you're sharing, lots and lots of things. Regardless of what that broader impact activity is, I want you to remember 3 important points. It's better to do 1 or 2 things really well than to try to do 1,000 things in your broader impacts. And not every PI or organization is well suited for the same broader impact activity. So just because your colleague is doing X thing and they're succeeding really well at that does not mean that it's right for you or your institution. Propose the thing that is right for you and right for your group and for your institution, your state, wherever you are. And if you're a reviewer, I hope you keep this in mind as well, right? You don't need to compare everybody's work. What is appropriate for what is being proposed? And then lastly, I firmly believe that the broader impacts should be integrated and meaningful and not just tacked on at the end as an afterthought. There are 2 merit review criteria. They are both extremely important, and we'll talk about this more in the merit review session, but it really, when you're building your project description, they should be integrated and connected to what you're proposing to do on the intellectual merit side. Next slide. Speaking of what scientists are used to and what they find easy, I think a lot of researchers are they're used to writing papers. We all are. And then when it comes to writing a proposal, it's important to keep in mind that a proposal is very different from a paper. And I just want to walk through a few ways in which you think about how a proposal is different, right? A paper is a scholarly pursuit. It's often just an individual or team passion. It's describing work that's been done in the past. And a proposal is really aimed at NSF goals, the sponsor goals, the program's goals. It should come with a service attitude. You're doing work for the scientific community. It's future-oriented. You're describing work that should be done. A paper is often very theme-centered. It can be talking about theory and thesis, but a proposal is project-centered, right? You're talking about what activities you're going to do, who's involved, what do you need to do that work. A paper can often contain a lot more expository rhetoric, right? You're explaining to the reader. It's often, journals really prefer you to have a more impersonal tone. It's more objective. But a proposal should be persuasive. You are selling the reader. You should convey excitement. You want the reader to really be excited about what you're proposing to do. And a paper can really lean into more jargon because the people reading that paper are the people who are seeking it out for a reason. They're interested in that topic already. They probably have expertise. But a proposal needs to have accessible language and be easily understood by a much broader group of people, program directors, reviewers, and panelists who might have like generalized expertise, but may not be exactly in your field. So these are just some of the ways we want you to kind of mind shift away when you're writing a proposal from it being just like a paper. Okay, and I just want to just throw out some other helpful advice. I know this is a text-heavy slide, but I'm going to walk through some things, and I invite my colleagues to add as well. These are just things that we've learned over our many years of reading proposals. So you always want to start with a compelling introduction, right? This is a statement of your intellectual merit. You want to catch the reader's attention. We were talking about the project summary earlier, same place in the introduction. Tell us what you want to do and why it's exciting and important. And you want to lay out your specific hypothesis to be tested, or explain that like your compelling observation is so new that you don't even have a hypothesis. You just need to like do the work to even figure out what the hypothesis is. That's okay. Not every project has a hypothesis, but it should be clear what kind of proposal you're doing right at the front. You want to explain why previous studies have just not been enough to answer this question or resolve this problem, and why now you're here to solve it for everybody. You don't want to spend too much time on this background. Some proposals can get a little too deep into that, but you want to make the case that no one could do this before, and now I'm here to do it. And then explain why your field site or your experiment or your model, whatever you're focused on, why it was chosen for that study. You want your figures, your maps, your captions, be clearly readable. Make sure that people can understand what they say. I mentioned this earlier, but lay out a clear work plan and timeline for everyone involved. Who is doing what, why, and when, and be realistic when you're thinking about what that timeline is and who can do what. Make sure that the work that you're proposing for undergraduates is appropriate for undergraduates, and the work that is appropriate that you're proposing postdoc do is appropriate for a postdoc. And then I always like to tell people, before you submit, find a smart friend who can read it and tell you, does it make sense? You laid out this great hypothesis or question at the beginning, and when they read through that proposal, by the time they get to the end, can they see how it connects back to the beginning? Can they see how this work is going to answer the questions you laid out at the beginning? So don't just let your sponsored research office read it, let someone else. Any other wisdom?
Yeah, let me just follow on to what you just said. First of all, many of your institutions out there actually provide people to the National Science Foundation. They're either Intergovernmental Personnel Act, IPAs, or experts. Those are great resources for you to tap at your institution because they've been at NSF, they've been in a review panel, or even others at your institution that have served as reviewers, because they can morph from the person preparing the proposal to the person reviewing that proposal. And it's a different role, and their perspectives can be very, very helpful. Also, these are like a story, a beginning, a middle, and an end. And if there's a piece missing, it's going to be very obvious to the reviewer, wait a minute, I didn't get from here to there. I need more information. You don't want the reviewer being in that situation and then having to provide a rating for that proposal. So just a couple of additional things to think about.
Carol, I think you're up next.
Next slide, please. So the project description, there are many good things about it, but there are some common mistakes, and it would be good to think about that. The first one is, your scope really has to match the duration of the award, should you be awarded. If it's too large, and that happens especially with early career folks, people know that you're not going to be able to finish it, and they wonder, if you really know how to plan a project. And if it's too narrow, they go, oh, it's not exciting. It's just on a very tiny slice of all that you could do. That's not exciting either. So make sure that the scope matches the duration of the award. Similarly, the requested personnel has to match the proposed workload. If you have enough work for 25 students and only request one, people are going to really understand that you're proposing things that you're not going to be able to do. Similarly, if you have 25 people and you're just asking them to tweak one variable, that's going to be a very disappointing proposal as well. The proposed plan has to address the stated goals of the project. Again, this is going back and looping around, telling a story, as Jean said, but you have to be able to connect each task with some kind of goal or hypothesis. What do you want to get out of doing this? And a big no-no is always saying you're going to recruit students from underrepresented groups, but there's no plan to do that in the proposal. So how are you going to do that? That's sometimes a tougher task. And we want you to be, legitimately connected to doing that. I would add a few more common mistakes. One is that the proposed work is actually past work. So I've seen awful lot of times people already have this preliminary data. They've already kind of done the experiment, and then they write to propose it to make sure that they can accomplish it. But reviewers pick up on that awful fast, and that's one of the things that can really tank a proposal quickly. Another one is missing literature in the field. If the reviewers are people who have done similar work, similar interests in their careers, and you're not mentioning them at all, or you've missed a huge number of competing groups' efforts, it does going to look like you're not as scholarly as you would like a proposal to be. And the last one I would say is don't be too conservative. We do want great research, not just the next increment of a project. So next slide, please. So these are the references, and this is a required section. So reference information will be used to make sure that you're following the scholarly practices of your field. You want to provide citations. You don't want these citations to be so encyclopedic that it's much, much longer than the rest of your proposal. So a few key references are really what's important. The references are used often by the program staff to find reviewers. So it's really important that you give a good number of people in the field. People are going to look at that very carefully. And it's also used by reviewers, as I said before, to evaluate that the effort is state of the art and that, how your project fits into the big context of your discipline. Next slide, please.
So I'm going to take it over here and talk about the budget and budget justification. And one of the merit review criteria is that they're looking at, do you have the necessary resources to carry out the research as proposed? And so the budget and budget justification are one of a couple ways that this can be done. And it's important to also understand that at the different stages of the NSF process, the budget will be looked at a bit differently. So reviewers, we are asking, do they have the resources that they need to carry out? Not talking dollar values, but as already mentioned in the last section by Carol, they've read the project description. They're looking at the personnel section and they're going, wow, that doesn't match with the need. This project description requires the 20 students. They've asked for 2. So that is what we're asking for reviewers. Is what is requested needed to complete that particular scope of work? When it gets into the budget review by program officers, they're looking at things from a bit different perspective, and I'm going to let my colleagues join in here in a minute on that. But then if you're fortunate enough to have a recommendation for award, it's going to go to the Division of Grants and Agreements or Division of Acquisition and Cooperative Support, our awarding branches at NSF. And that's where they're going to be looking at things like allowability, allocability, reasonableness of costs. So each particular set of reviewers during the process, whether it be the reviewers in the peer review process, NSF program staff, or our funding offices, will be looking at the budget and budget justification for different things. So that's really important to understand. So some basics about this. Each proposal has to have a budget for each year of support requested. We give you 5 pages. It's called the budget justification to justify why you need the funding you're requesting. Use those 5 pages. They are very important for folks saying, okay, I see this dollar value. Here's why they really need it. And a lot of folks don't use the budget justification as a great tool to say, here's why I need that. So you've got those 5 pages, use them. If you have a dollar value in any budget category, it should have a corresponding entry in the budget justification. I just cannot emphasize this enough. And also, many budgets, when it gets to negotiating the actual budgetary amount, are modified by NSF program staff. Make it hard for them to do that by justifying in that budget justification why you need that amount of funding. If there are subawards under the particular proposal, they have to include a separate budget justification of no more than 5 pages for each subaward. Some basic concepts to also consider. We've also talked already in the project description and project summary about broader impacts. Make sure you can ask for funding for your broader impacts, and many folks don't seem to know that they can do that. And one of the most important bullets on this slide is ask for what you need to do the project, because as I mentioned, that's what the reviewers are looking at. They're going to see they've got a piece of equipment. That's a really nice, expensive piece of equipment, but I've done the project not using that very expensive piece of equipment. So you really should be asking, what do you need to do that project? And then justify it. The funds obviously have to be realistic and reasonable, and there may be, and we keep emphasizing this, some solicitation-specific requirements, like you're required to attend a PI meeting. There's going to be reverse site visits that you're going to have to participate in. Make sure that those are also reflected in the budget. Next slide, please. So the information, there's a lot of information in the PAP guide, and I'm not going to repeat all of that here. We're trying to go beyond that in these sessions. And you also, as we've mentioned a number of times, need to consider that program solicitation as well. Generically, the eligible costs are personnel, equipment, travel, participant support, and an other direct cost category that can include subawards, consultant services, computer services, publication costs. I should note that the budget format NSF uses is consistent with the standard government-wide research application in grants.gov called the SF 424 R&R. So this piece of the presentation actually in some ways is much broader than NSF, because these categories have been determined to be appropriate categories for folks doing and conducting research. But let me say a little bit more about personnel, because a lot of folks aren't aware of this, and I want to make sure you're clear about NSF's expectations here. NSF, in the way of personnel, limits the salary requested in the proposal budget for each senior key person to no more than 2 months of their regular salary in any 1 year. And this includes salary received from all NSF funded grants. So this is something that will be looked at. Let me also talk a bit about participant support, because many folks do not really understand what participant support really even is. Participant support are direct costs that support participants in the way of stipends, subsistence, travel allowance, registration fees, paid directly to on behalf of participants in connection with their involvement in an NSF conference, training, or outreach activity. So that's something that you really, if you're going to be putting participant support costs in a budget, it's really important that you read that particular section of the PAP guide. Now, before I go on out of this section, I really want to see if Jen or Carol have any comments from a programmatic perspective on the budget that you would all like to share as well.
I think you've got it covered.
Yeah, it was a great list, and I would only reemphasize the ask for what you need and ask for money for your broader impacts, right? We don't expect you to do the science for free, and we don't expect you to accomplish the broader impacts that, again, we want to be integrated and meaningful. We don't expect you to do those for free either. So yeah, that's a message we want to spread far and wide.
Thank you. Next slide, please. So the next section I want to talk about is facilities, equipment, and other resources. And so you'll remember I just mentioned the fact that there were a couple of ways to answer that question that the reviewer is asked. Do they have the necessary resources to carry out the project as proposed? And this is one other way that you can do this, because this section is used to assess the adequacy of the organizational resources available to perform the effort proposed. And it should describe any organizational resources, both physical, meaning, equipment, etc., as well as the personnel that are available or would be available should the project be funded. We sometimes find an institution that say, we're going to fund 6 graduate students. You're not asking money from NSF, but you need the reviewer to know that those students would be available to assist with that project. So remember, that should be included as well. It's narrative in nature. And again, you are really trying to convince the reviewer that between the budget and what your institution, including any collaborating organizations, will be providing to this project, to say, can they do it with what we're seeing in either the budget, facilities, equipment, and other resources. Let me also say a couple of points about what we see. First of all, we don't really need to know that your institution has given you a computer. This is really more the specialized resources that would be available, not basic things like I have an office. That's simply not what we're looking for here in facility, equipment, and other resources. There is no page limitation to this section, and we're actually not asking you to provide quantifiable information here. There's always been very concerned. This is what you provide here is very useful and often not really fully considered by those submitting proposals. Like I said, they're providing more basic information of facilities and equipment that we know you have. So I think I can't underestimate the value of this section of the proposal. Next slide, please. Biographical sketch. NSF has moved and has implemented a biographical sketch that is been implemented by the National Science and Technology Council. And I can't emphasize that this is another place in this section that you're going to find information that will be useful in dealing with other federal funding, other federal research funding agencies. So it provides biographical sketches are required for all senior key personnel, the PI and co-PI, as well as any other individual that you define as a senior key person on your project. So every one of them will have to have this biographical sketch. They are used to assess how well qualified the individual or team is to conduct the proposed activities. So reviewers, again, are going to match up that project description and what you've said about what each individual is going to do. And then they're going to be looking at these biographical sketches to say, okay, does that individual or team, can they actually carry out that project they're proposing to do? It does include, again, this is harmonized across agencies, identifying information about you and your organization, information about proposal, your professional preparation, appointments, positions, and products. Now, NSF is unique in the products. We ask you to provide 5 products that are most closely related to the project and 5 other significant products, which are related or not. And we are asked a lot, which product should I choose? You need to choose the products that help make your case that you have the capabilities to conduct this research. That is super, super important to emphasize. We also have individuals are required per this requirement from the National Science and Technology Council to disclose any contracts associated with participation in programs sponsored by foreign governments, instrumentalities, or entities, including foreign government-sponsored talent recruitment programs. These are not bad things. They are, many of them are very much helpful in your preparation to conduct this research. They are not considered a bad thing. In fact, folks have looked at these as a bad thing and be hesitant to identify them. It's not a bad thing. You just need to disclose them. There is a difference in this, in that the CHIPS and Science Act of 2022 had a requirement that NSF and other agencies have implemented, which requires the senior or key person to certify that they are not a party to a malign foreign talent recruitment program. And that's a very long definition that is included in the PAP guide, but it definitely includes 4 countries of concern: China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea. So take a look at that, because you are, at the time of submitting that proposal, including your bio sketch, you certifying that you are not a party to a malign foreign talent recruitment program. NSF also requires you to prepare these biographical sketches in a system called Science CV, which is actually owned by NIH and their National Library of Medicine. So you will need to go into Science CV, pick the NSF option, fill it out, complete the form, and then upload it. Each senior key person will upload these in Science CV. We have been asked, are there options other than Science CV? There are not. You will need to go in and And you could have many different profiles developed for different proposals you've developed within Science CV. But it is important that you understand that Science CV is required to be used. Okay, next slide, please. Current and pending other support. This, like the biographical sketch, is one of 2 common disclosure forms that was put out by the National Science and Technology Council, and NSF has implemented its use as well. So what is it? This section of the proposal asks for information on all current and pending support for any ongoing project and proposal, the purpose, as well as any in-kind contributions. These are required to be disclosed. Well, why are we asking for it? Well, we're asking for it to assess the capacity of the individual. Do you have the time to do what you're proposing to do based on all of your other current and pending other support? We also use it to assess any potential overlap or duplication with the project that's being proposed. You also have to certify, just like you did for the biographical sketch, that you're not a party to a malign foreign talent recruitment program. These also must be submitted in Science or created in Science CV. So one of the questions we get most frequently at policy@nsf.gov is, I got a problem. You're making me submit a document when I have no current and pending other support. So what am I supposed to do? It says I have to have one. The proposal that you are submitting must always be listed on current and pending other support, because it may take or will take an amount of your time. And so if we're using this information to assess capacity, that proposal needs to be, the actual proposal you're submitting needs to be on it as well. So you will submit one for every single proposal. Next slide, please. So this is a bit hard to read, but I cannot emphasize enough the importance of this document. There was a link on it in the last slide, but it is a document that contains the pre and post-award disclosures for both the biographical sketch and current and pending support. This is used by all federal research funding agencies. On the top is the type of activity. I'll give you the first example. Postdoctoral scholars, students, or visiting scholars who are supported by an external entity and whose research activities are intended for use on the project being proposed. Where do you provide this information? Well, I just described the facilities, equipment, and other resources. That is where you would provide that information. There are about 5 pages to this document, and they are letting you know what type of disclosures go in the biographical sketch, current and pending other support, facilities, equipment, and other resources. And then the next 2 are post-award reporting. And then we have a final column of disclosure not required. And there are many, many of them that, if you look through this document, are not things that you may, do I have to report this? Is it an in-kind contribution? Do you consider it, NSF, an in-kind contribution? That will totally help you fill out this section of the proposal. Again, how did we develop it? Well, NSF and NIH got together and put together all the questions that we were receiving on current and pending other support. And we said, we've got to develop something that is useful to say, do you have to report this or do you not? That is why there are so many fine-tuned examples on this particular slide. So when you get ready, you've had this proposal preparation session. You're very excited about preparing this new proposal, and you get to current and pending other support. Please open this document because it will help you navigate the disclosure information you're required to provide and when it's not required to be provided, as well as where it must be put in the proposal you're preparing to submit to NSF. Next slide, please.
All right, I'm going to talk a little bit about the Synergistic Activities document, which if you've been submitting to NSF for a long time, you might remember this used to be part of the BioSketch. It's its own document, can be up to 1 page and should list up to 5 examples, not 25, 5. I say this from looking at a series of proposals recently. This is really the opportunity to demonstrate the broader impacts of your work in a very broad sense. And the instructions tell you to focus on the transfer of knowledge and its creation. So what does that actually mean, right? It means you want to show how, not just like, oh, I've generated a bunch of data or knowledge, but how have you put those results to use? How have you put your experience to use? And that can be in society, in education, in the creation of a business, in, impacting policy, developing standards, all of those ways. But this is your chance to sort of describe what else you do outside of this research that really impacts the broader society.
Let me also add here that we get a lot of questions on why 1 page and why 5 distinct examples. And the reason is very clear. We want to provide a level of parity and understanding of all individuals who are senior key personnel. Some may be less experienced and more junior in their actual career, and they may not have 25 examples like a more experienced researcher. So we want to level the playing field, and we believe that 5 examples should be sufficient for you to do that. Now, we get a lot of questions also about, well, what do you mean by 5 distinct examples? So someone might say, I served as a reviewer for the National Science Foundation. Well, you may want to expand that a bit because you've actually reviewed for other federal agencies. So you can say, I've reviewed for NIH and DOE and EPA as an example. And that is the fact that you're reviewing is a distinct example. It's where people are doing what Jen just said and really trying to really go beyond the 5 examples, and they've got 1 page, more space, so they feel like they want to fill it up. So let's just gives you a sense of why we created that 1 page and list of 5 and the things you can and cannot do in that space. Carol, anything else from you?
No, I just think this is a great demonstration of really, we are stewards of taxpayer dollars. And so what you've created or generated in terms of data, how you've put that together and how you put your results to use, I think it's a great demonstration of what we're doing for the country.
Thank you. Next slide, please.
So there are several other sections of the proposal, and these really focus on kind of the people and how you're going to work and how you're going to collaborate. Next slide, please. So the first one is the mentoring of graduate students or postdoctoral scholars. And so this was expanded as of the PAPPG 24-1 to include the graduate students, not just the postdocs. And it really is how you're going to work, with your team to make sure that they excel and, maybe can get a job after your experience in the laboratory. So the mentoring activities can include career counseling, training and proposal writing, publishing and presenting, actually collaborating, how they're going to teach and mentor others. So there are many, many activities that you can think of. These activities are going to be reviewed as part of the broader impacts. And so they are an important part of the proposal and shouldn't be neglected. We really want you to think about how you're working with people who are depending on you for guidance and protecting, them from, making career decisions that they shouldn't make. So there may be some ethical considerations or something in the research. You want to help them go through that as well. For collaborative proposals, the lead organization must submit a single mentoring plan. So if you're collaborating, then it's really kind of one activity for everybody, and it's just one mentoring plan for the entire collaborative project. Next slide.
No,
sorry,
just
go ahead.
a couple of other things. So this came out in 24-1. So that was for proposals submitted or due on or after May 20, 2024. And this was where we implemented this. And the kind of questions we get, well, are there separate plans for the graduate student and postdocs? Because you get one page to do this. And the answer is no. It is one plan that covers both graduate students and postdocs. You may, in that one page, say, we're going to do things, this is what we're going to do for graduate students, and this is what we're going to do for postdocs. But it continues to be one plan and not separate submitted plans for both grad students and postdocs. So I just wanted to highlight that for everyone.
Thanks, Jean. That's great. Next slide, please. So the data management and sharing plan. And so this is also really critical. When your students are working in your lab or your postdocs working in your lab, how are they, putting their lab notebooks together? Is it electronic, or are you still using paper? What data standards are your community using? You want to try to use existing data facilities if at all possible. And so you have to think about, how do you find the data? Is it accessible? Can you use it from different systems or different instruments? And is it reusable for other projects? So follow the FAIR principles. And I think the big ones to really think about is, how are you going to share among collaborators? So graduate students sharing with you, you sharing with people at another institution or another government lab or some other facility. And then what is the timeline for data release? So as more and more people start thinking about patenting and, activities like that, it is important to think about the data and when you've, presented it and published it and, if you want to patent it. So these are really just kind of protecting your intellectual property and making sure that it's not lost or irretrievable for some reason. Next one, please. So then we come to letters of collaboration and letters of support. And I think this is a big place where there's often a lot of confusion. What's the difference between a letter of collaboration and a letter of support? So a collaboration really states, and this is the language, that as stated in the proposal, it's the collaborator's intent to commit the resources and to do the stated activities. So their role is specified in the project description or the facilities and equipment and other resources. And so you have to make sure that they have read the proposal and include the statement in the letters of collaboration. The intellectual contributions are very important. The permission to access a site, to furnish samples, to give support or evaluation services, and to mentor the students, at the institution or even at a foreign site. So this is the plan that you're putting together, and these people are very, very actively involved in the intellectual and broader impact endeavors of the proposal itself. Next slide, please. So a letter of support is usually from a key stakeholder, and they're saying that they're enthusiastic about the project, and they often highlight the specific qualification of a PI or a co-PI. Letters of support are required for the career program, and that's the departmental letter. And the person who's signing that letter is not collaborating with you, is not working with you on your proposal, but is saying, what they intend to provide you with, or, how they view your contributions and your activities both as a scholar and as a teacher in the university. So letters of support are very unique to the proposal. They can't be altered, obviously, and they really speak to your qualifications. So these are more, they're highlighting what's great about you and your project, whereas the other ones are really saying, they're working with you and this is how they're doing it. So letters of collaboration actually focus on the collaboration. Letters of support are kind of, I don't want to say cheerleading letters, but they're definitely, the enthusiasm they might have either as a user or some other stakeholder. Would you guys like to add any more here?
Yeah, I just really, the should at that should be stronger. It really should be must not be included, because for the most part, except if that solicitation tells you to include them, we know that those letters of support, you think they're vitally important. We don't want them unless the solicitation tells you to. And that's a real fundamental difference from a letter of collaboration, is that these are very solicitation specific. And career is a very notable example of where we do require them, but the vast majority of our solicitations do not.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so we'll go to the next slide, please. And then there are special information and supplementary documentation that's very specific to particular types of projects. And I won't go through these all, you can read them here. And there much more information given in the PAPPG, but you can see if you're doing environmental studies or studies with animals or other human subjects, you should think very carefully about the additional requirements that those proposals will have. Next slide, please.
Okay, we have covered a lot today, and you may still have questions. I know we've covered a lot, but there's so much more to learn. And really, the ask early, ask often, this is the mantra. Please talk to the program directors. If you have a question, reach out to us. We are here to help, and we want you to succeed. You can search for us by name at nsf.gov/staff, or you can go to the org list, which is the second link there, and sort of find the program or division that you're looking for and then decide who you want to talk to. Of course, the best way to learn is to come and work with us. So we're always looking for folks to come and join us, either temporarily or permanently. So thanks very much for joining us today. And I think we might have a little more time for a few more questions.
Okay, let me welcome my colleagues back. We do have a little bit of time for questions, and I do want to thank both all the presenters and also my colleagues Samantha and Beth for answering so many questions behind the scenes. Thank you all for doing that. I know that Jean wanted to bring up an issue before we get started into the questions, so I'll turn it over to Jean.
Yeah, and just for folks, because we saw a number of questions that we couldn't get to, and we're not going to get to all of them. We answered over 110 questions during this. We were all busy typing away, so thank you for your patience, and we're going to get to as many as we can. But there were a couple issues that came up that had multiple threads to them, and one was about the 2-month salary policy. So again, to reiterate, NSF's policy is that you can ask for up to 2 months salary compensation across all NSF funded grants, not just the grant or proposal you're submitting. So it would be at NSF will support 2 months, and you can ask for more if you really believe the research warrants it, but you really have to put it in the budget, defend it in the budget justification, and the program officer would have to include it as part of the approved budget. So I just did want to really reiterate that this is a policy unique to NSF, very long-standing for over 50 years now. And so I just wanted to make clear that it's 2 months across all NSF funded projects. And after the award is made, you can rebudget those funds unless it is a change in objective or scope. So the policy really is described in Chapter 2, 2-14 and 2-15. Given the number of questions, I would definitely encourage you to take a look at that section of the PAP guide in particular.
Yes, we did have quite a few questions on the 2-month salary, and I know we answered some of them during the Q&A. So please take a look at those. I want to try and get to some questions where we saw some repeat types of questions, and some of them, there are variations on the same theme. The first area I wanted to get into was with foreign organizations, institutions, and PIs and co-PIs. So perhaps we can talk just a little bit about how NSF deals with proposals from foreign organizations, number one, and then two, whether it's possible to have a foreign PI or co-PI, a PI or co-PI from a foreign organization on a proposal.
Okay, so I'm going to give the overall policy because we had a lot of questions in this space. So we want to make sure you leave understanding. NSF overall, in terms of eligibility, we rarely directly fund a foreign organization. In fact, we're so regularly asked this that every year we have to provide data on the number of foreign organizations that we support. And it is almost always under 15. After of the thousands and thousands of awards that we make, we just really, we more look at it that we will fund the US side of the collaboration, and our international partner would then get funding for their research from their own country. But we talk in the PAP guide that if you want to include a foreign subaward or a foreign consultant, you can do that, but you must provide justifications, and they definitely, you should look at the eligibility because they talk about providing justifications why support from the foreign countries and country resources are not feasible, how they could carry out more effectively than a US organization or individual. And so I would look at that section of the PAP guide. We were specifically asked the question, do we check the box for international collaboration? No. If you are actually looking to support a foreign consultant or foreign organization via subaward, you rather check the box funding of a foreign organization or foreign individual. We have a number of programs that also have collaborations with other foreign governments involved, and they actually provide very specific instructions on what you do for the co-PIs, if they are co-PIs from that foreign organization. So it may vary depending on that collaboration. So Carol, Jen, do you have anything further to add to that? But we had a lot of questions in this space, so we know that there are.
Yeah, and I think and you did cover the next one I was going to ask. So thank you for that. I'm sorry. Did you? The next one I wanted to ask was about co-PIs from subaward organizations. The question is, can you have a co-PI from a subaward organization, and how does that work, whether it's a subaward proposal or whether there's a separately submitted collaborative proposal? How does that work with co-PIs on a project?
This is a great question. So if you are, we ask for every subaward to identify a PI. But it is up to the prime organization to determine who the one PI, and it must be from the prime organization, and up to 4 co-PIs. That individual on the subaward may be a PI if that's the determination that they make for that project. or they may just be a senior key person. It is up to the collaborating organizations to make those determinations one way or the other.
Okay, and I think we covered
sorry,
this.
I didn't
Go.
answer the separately submitted.
Oh,
In the
go
case
ahead.
of a separately submitted collaborative proposal, because they are separate proposals, can have one PI and up to 4 co-PIs. So it's going to be different in terms of numbers of PIs, whether it's a prime and subaward, or they are actually separately submitted collaborative proposals.
Okay, we talked about the prohibition on URLs in the project description, but I saw a lot of questions about, can I use URLs in this section? Can I use them in this section? Perhaps we could just set the record straight on the use of URLs in a proposal to NSF.
Well, clearly, we are very, very clear that you cannot use URLs in project descriptions. That being said, that is the one most heavily enforced, but I will tell you that any proposal section that's got a page limitation on it, if you include a URL, and references cited isn't one of them, and we got a number of questions on references cited, but it has no page limitation. But clearly, if you are including a URL in a section of the proposal that does have a page limitation, then you effectively, you could be sending them to 1,000 more new pages. So be very careful in that regard, because it is something that some programs take more seriously than other at NSF. But particularly my program officer colleagues, if your programs do that differently, it would be helpful for you to point that out.
No, it's a way of getting around the extra pages, and it also is a way that potentially we don't know what kind of data they could be tracking or anything from those clicks. And so we pay a lot of attention to the URLs and try to recommend that people limit them in other parts of the proposal.
Okay, one last quick question before we go, and this is about letters of collaboration. Should the letters of collaboration be included from all key personnel, including co-PIs?
No, the letters of collaboration are typically from unfunded collaborators who have a role in the project that's identified in the project description. And the purpose of that is that they're not included on the budget. So people really need to know, reviewers, is that person really going to show up if that project is funded? And that is really so you identify their role as Jen so clearly articulated in the project description, but then you would attach that letter of collaboration from that unfunded collaborator as noted in the PAP guide.
Great, thank you. We're just at time, and I want to thank you all for joining us today. I do want to mention that please save the dates for the Spring 2025 NSF Grants Conference, which will be taking place May 21st to 23rd in New Orleans. That will be in person, and a virtual option will also be available. Thank you all for joining us today, and we hope to see you later on.